When it comes to personality type, not every person, not every group holds to the exact same system or the exact same theories. In objective personality, they use something called, it's a slightly different language. They use the words observers in place of perceivers, or observing functions in place of perceiving functions. And they use deciders in place of judgers, or deciding functions in place of judging functions. So the EPs and the IJs are considered single observers because they have an observing function at the top, then two deciding functions, or what MBTI would call two judging functions, and then they have their other observing function down at the bottom, fourth, what we would call the inferior function. The IPs and the EJs are referred to as single deciders because they have that judging or deciding function, either their thinking or feeling, at the top. Then they have their two observing functions in the middle, sensing and intuition in some order and some extroverted versus introverted, breakdown. And then they have their other decider or judging function at the bottom in the inferior slot. The objective personality model takes a look at these different groups, the single observers and the single deciders, and finds some similarities between the two single deciding groups, IPs and EJs, and the two single observing groups, EPs and IJs. Now, when I was first listening to what Dave and Shannon had to say on this topic, I found it fascinating. I didn't throw it out or anything like that. I just listened and considered. And after I not only heard them teach on these topics a significant amount, but also watched them prove their theories over and over by showing videos of celebrities having the same reactions and interactions and sort of language constructs, or the same freakouts, if you will, if they were IJs and EPs, and then they would play video of the IPs and the EJs having very similar, we'll just call them freakouts as well, or focuses, whatever you want to call it. And so I want to take a look at those, because what I did was, after listening to them teach and after watching them evidence their theories by showing the theories coming to fruition in the actions, the words, and the lives of celebrities, I decided, well, if it is as obvious as they're saying, if the differences, if the commonalities among IJs and EPs are as obvious as they're saying and as they're showing in their videos of celebrities, and if the commonalities among IPs and EJs are as common as they're saying, then I ought to be able to see them in people that I know. So I began to observe very closely people that I know, and lo and behold, Dave and Shannon are right. And so I want to take a moment to talk about what it is that they teach and how I see it come out in people. So let's start with the single deciders. I'm an IP, so I'm a single decider. I'm an ISFP, so I fit into the IP category. And much of what I'm about to say is true of both IPs and EJs. We're both single deciders. Now, what that means is that we tend to be relatively balanced in the observing game. So when it comes to sensing and intuition, which are the observing or perceiving functions, the functions that we use to take in, information basically and make sense of it. When it comes to the sensing and intuition game, IPs and EJs tend to be relatively balanced. But where they tend to be unbalanced and therefore have over-focusing problems and freak-out problems, where they tend to be unbalanced in that way is in the land of thinking and feeling. Now, how does that come out? What Dave and Shannon talk about is the fact that IPs and EJs focus so very heavily on identity, on significance, on validation, And all of that finds its manifestation in interactions with other human beings. And therefore, IPs and EJs are extremely focused on the interactions that they have had, are having, and will have with other people. IPs and EJs are going to see human beings largely as unmovable. They're largely going to see people as their biggest problems in life. They're going to struggle the most with dealing with other people. And you'll see that come out in the fact that if you were to really analyze what stresses the IPs and what stresses the EJs the most, it usually boils down to human interactions. We are nervous about, fearful of, overwhelmed by, confused by. We struggle with human interactions. Now, if we contrast that with the IJs and the EPs, who are single observers, meaning that their sensing and their intuition is much more imbalanced, they tend to be much more balanced in the world of thinking and feeling. And therefore, now keep in mind, everybody has problems with human interactions at times, but they tend to be much more fluid with and comfortable with human interactions and see people largely as movable, workable. They can work with people and come to the solutions that they need to without tending as much to get overwhelmed or overly stressed by the fact that they must interact and deal with people in order to do it. So where do the IJs and the EPs tend to have their struggles? They tend to see the physical world or the items and the things, the goings on of the world, not necessarily people related, to be as being more unmovable. They will struggle much more with things happening that are not necessarily people happenings, and they will struggle to either foresee the events that might come and therefore be caught very much off guard by them. They will struggle to deal with or to make sense of things that happen in the world around them, in the physical world, whether that's things breaking down, things not going as expected. It could be freakouts or difficulties or struggles with, as Dave and Shannon tend to put it, with information. They're struggling to make sense of what's going on, of why things are the way they are, or why this thing didn't work out the way they thought it would, or something along those lines. They'll see people as very fluid and easy to work with, but the physical things and the goings on as being very unmovable and difficult, and that's what will tend to stress them more. And IPs and EJs will tend to be more fluid with the things that are going on and be like, no, I can work around that. Okay, that didn't go exactly like I thought, but I can see a solution for that. We'll just do this, that, and that, as long as it doesn't involve having to deal with people. The IPs and the EJs, once you bring other people in, are going to then begin to struggle and have their freakouts. So let me give you some examples that I have seen, okay? I was watching a YouTuber who was talking about going to an antique fair. And she was talking about the items that she bought at the antique fair. And now I understand that her video was meant to showcase the things that she bought at the antique fair, but while she was at the antique fair, she undoubtedly had numerous interactions with human beings. But as she talked about things, she would say, here was this item and it was this much money. And I asked the guy if he would come down to this, and he did. So I got it for this. And then she said, I was looking at this item and this woman came over to me and she said this, this, and this. And I said, yeah. And we had a real quick interaction. And then back to the thing. Let me tell you about the thing that I got. There was a human interaction there, but it was not the focus of the story. It was a side aspect of the story. The focus of the story was, let's talk about the things. And then she even ended her video by talking about the things that went wrong while she was trying to film the video. The camera battery went dead and something else went wrong. She named 3 things. I can't remember what they were. She was very focused on the things that went wrong, the things that she wanted to show off. And yes, while I understand that that's what the video was about, the point is she had ample opportunities to talk about people. She had plenty of human interactions while she was at the antique fair, but she was so focused on the things, and I believe, by the way, she's an EP or an IJ. She was so focused on the things that the people were just like a side note. She didn't get distracted by or off on a long tangent talking about the people and the difficulties that she had with the people. I mean, think about it. If you had to barter with somebody to get an item in an antique fair and to get it down, right? For some people, that's going to be very stressful. And so when you go to make a video about the situation, you might be like, and I had to go talk to this guy, and this guy and you're going to tell us about the guy, and you're going to tell us about the whole interaction with the guy and the difficulties and the way that he talked and kind of the look that he got on his face when you began to ask him if he would take less money. That's what an IP or an EJ would do. And when the woman came over and talked to her about the item that she was going to buy, she would have spent much more time talking about the woman. She would have been like, and this woman came over and she might have described the woman and she might have said, and here's what she said, verbatim. And this is how I felt about it. And it made me feel this way when she said that. And I started thinking, and I had to think through and analyze, why would she say that? And so on and so forth. The EP and the IJs, when they're talking about these things, they interact with people. They have plenty of opportunities to get sidetracked telling us all about the difficulties and the complexities and the freakouts that they had when they had to have the human interactions along the way while they were doing the thing that they're trying to tell their story about or make their video about. But the IJs and the EPs largely won't. They won't get sidetracked because the people are just a side note. It's not a big deal. People are easy. People interactions for IJs and EPs are a little bit easier. They're a little bit, it's no big deal. It's not that you don't, if you're an IJ or an EP, ever go, oh my gosh, I have to have a people interaction. It's not that. It's just that is not so overwhelming on a regular basis that you're going to make it the focus of your life. If you're an IJ or an EP and you're thinking, I have people problems, I struggle with people, you might, but you just might not understand how much IPs and EJs struggle with it. You might struggle, but on the spectrum, you may be more to the it's not that big of a deal, it's relatively easy side compared to the IPs and EJs, but you don't realize that because you don't know what it feels like to be an IP or an EJ. But watch people. Watch the IPs and the EJs because when they start talking, they can't stop talking about people. So after I watched that video where that IJ EP person, I'm not sure which, I think she's an EP, but I'm not sure. It was not that enough of a video to really give me that full of a breakdown of her personality type, although I've watched a few of her videos, so I'm getting there. But then I immediately watched a video of a musician, and she was being interviewed about many things. And a couple of the things that she was being interviewed on were the makings of her albums, her first album, the making of some of her first videos, and her first awards ceremony that she went to. Now, when you're making an album, not that I've ever made one, but I'm quite confident that when you're making an album, making a video, or going to an awards ceremony, there are plenty of opportunities for things to go wrong, for things to be difficult, for scheduling to be off, for it to be difficult to get there on time, for the car to not start, for the camera to not work, for the something on the set to break down. You could be going to an awards ceremony and think, I didn't know which door to go in, and I was afraid my high heel would break, right? Or I was nervous about what seat was I supposed to sit in or something like that. Or I noticed that the seat was squeaky and through the whole thing, I thought, oh my gosh, the seat is squeaky. Those are things that you might hear the IJs and EPs talk about. If you asked an IP or an EJ musician these questions, they would probably focus very heavily on things like that, the scheduling and the logistics and did any of the things not work right, or were they odd, or did something, or they noticed something that really caught their eye. But this musician, though she had all the opportunities to talk about those types of things, because it was an open-ended question, tell us about your video, tell us about your, making your first album, tell us about going to your first award ceremony, all she talked about was people. Oh, well, making the first album, I met this person and he, believed that I could do this, and he arranged for me to go to this other country where I made this album, and I worked with this person, and I worked with that person, I worked with this person. By the way, I believe this musician is an IP. And then, tell us about your first video. Oh, well, this person asked me to be a part of a video collaboration with them. And so I was so honored to get to work with this person, and we worked together, and we worked with, this director, and so on and so forth. Well, tell me about your first award ceremony. Oh, well, I went and I met these people, and these people were there, and those people were there, and these people were there, and so on and so forth. And when you watch for that among people, even if you don't want to try to take the time to analyze, okay, is this an IP, EJ, EP, IJ? You forget all that if you want to. Wipe all that out and just ask yourself, when this person is given the opportunity to talk about something, does the conversation always get turned to talking about the things that went right, the things that went wrong, the difficulties, the logistics, the actual items, what broke, what worked right? Or do they always turn the conversation to the people? Because what I'm experiencing is that the IPs and the EJs will regularly turn the conversation to the people. IPs will frequently turn the conversation to themselves, by the way, talking about themselves, but also talking about the people. They'll even be naming people. The EJs especially will be like, this guy who is the head of this department at this place, and so on and so forth. They know everybody's name and exactly where they rank in the grand status of things. And you could ask an you can ask an IP or an EJ a very thing-related question and watch if they don't find some way to turn the conversation to be about people. And you can ask an EP or an IJ a very people-related question and watch if they don't find a way to turn the conversation to be about things. It's just the way they're wired. Why? Well, if you listen to Dave and Shannon, and I think they're right, because I'm seeing it more and more as I'm hearing what they're saying, seeing the evidence that they give in the videos that they show, and then seeing it in people that I actually know or people that I watch. It's like this. It breaks down like this. We IPs and EJs, when it comes to the thinking, feeling game, the identity and validation and significance among the people, among the group, we really are imbalanced. We only see one side of the coin. We either see the emotional side, the feeling side, the likes and values side, or we see the thinking and reason side, but we don't see both very well. And therefore, we're always a little bit off guard when it comes to other people and what are they thinking and how are they feeling and what am I feeling and what am I thinking and what are the reasons and what do I value and what do they value and what are their reasons and so on and so forth. And so we're always, it's like, as they say in objective personality, it's like we're only seeing half of the board when it comes to dealing with people, we IPs and the EJs as well. But when it comes to making sense of the world, the sensing and intuition side, we're seeing the whole picture a little bit better. Now you flip that for the EPs and the IJs when it comes to understanding the world and the things that are out there and how things work and why they all work out the way they do. They're relatively imbalanced on the sensing intuition side. It's like they're only seeing half of the situation. But when it comes to the working with people and the feelings and the thinking and the reasons and the values and things like that, they're pretty balanced. And so they don't get as freaked out about people, but the IPs and EJs do. Now, like I said, if you're an EP or an IJ and you're thinking, I get freaked out about people, I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying take a moment and look at other people and see how freaked out they get and ask yourself the question, do you get that freaked out about people? And one last example from my own life before I stop this video. And I think I've told this story in another video. Once upon a time, many years ago, I was working for a company and I was just so distraught and stressed every day. And I was dreading going to work every day. And my wife said, why? Why is this bothering you so badly? And I was like, I don't know. And I sat down and I thought through everything, and I thought through all the tasks that I have to do and the situations that I have to work out and everything that is involved in the making things function, flow, and understanding my job and figuring it all out and all that. And there was nothing there that was like, that wasn't it. I went through all that and that wasn't it. And I thought, well, maybe it's a person. So I started thinking one by one about the people that I have to interact with. And then I got to one guy and I was like, that's it. I'm literally like beside myself with stress, not able to enjoy a moment of my life, whether I'm at work or at home, and dreading every single day of having to go to this job. And it turns out it was all because of one guy. One guy was stressing me. And by the way, I have noticed in myself that it seems like every work environment I find myself in, there is that guy. And it's probably not because there really is that guy, but it's probably because I freak out over people and I must seem to almost create that guy. Like, it's almost like I can't function without having that person in my life that I go, oh my gosh, that guy's horrible. That guy freaks me out. I don't want to be around that guy. It's a problem on my end, and it's an IP problem. It's a problem that I have because I freak out over people. I'm relatively balanced over when things go wrong. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, the tire's flat. That stinks. It's going to mess up my day. Oh, well. Oh, the car won't start. Dadgummit, now I got to deal with this. And then I'm over it. I get it fixed. I'm like, okay, everything's fine. And I don't think about it a day later or a week later or a year later. And if you ask me a month later, what are the big problems that you've had over the last month? They're all going to be people focused. I'm not going to remember that the car didn't start one day. But the IJs and the EPs are going to be much more apt to be like, well, there was this thing and it wasn't working, and my the car didn't go right, and I didn't make it to where I needed to be on time, and so on and so forth. It's a really obvious difference, but you really should watch for it. But you really should. Therefore, it's a really obvious difference, and therefore I would encourage you, watch for it. Watch for it in the people you know. See if it's not true that certain people cannot not focus all of their attention on people, and other people cannot not focus all of their attention on things and the way things play out in the world, and don't talk much about people at all. It's very fascinating. Thank you so much for watching. Do please subscribe if you have not already. Please hit the like button if you found this video to be in any way informational, entertaining, or useful. Oh yeah, one more thing. I hit 600 subscribers today, which was really cool. So for all of you subscribers out there, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye.